The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. A good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. A hired man who is not really a shepherd and whose sheep are not his own sees a wolf coming and leaves the sheep, runs away, and the wolf catches and scatters the sheep. This is because he works for pay. He has no concern for the sheep. I am the good shepherd, Jesus says. I know mine. Mine know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, I will lay down my life for the sheep. Now I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold, and they also I must lead, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock, there will be one shepherd. This is why the Father loves me, because I laid down my life in order to take it up again. No one takes it from me. No one takes it from me. I lay it down on my own. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. The command, this is the command that I received from my Father. The Gospel of the Lord. It's always so nice to celebrate Mass here on Sunday afternoons. You are so full of fervor. The music is so dynamic. The ministry is also dedicated. I was a little sleepy when I got here. I don't know why. I think it's seeing the sun for the first time in probably 2 years. But there was something about it that left me awestruck, and I was ready to take a nap. And then I came out here and saw all of you gathered in worship with hopes and dreams. I read a story a few years ago, The Nut That Saved Our Marriage. Now, when you see that kind of a title, your attention is drawn to the article because it's kind of unusual. I thought it might be about the woman's husband. Maybe he had that kind of a sense of humor that can diffuse situations before they get explosive, or it can just be annoying sometimes, but usually they kind of calm things down. I thought maybe she was talking about one of her children. You know how in families sometimes there are dedicated people. Some of the children just have that sense of humor. They can get to the nub of things. But that wasn't it. I thought maybe it was a friend who made them see how silly it was to focus on the bad points of each one when there were so many good points. So it was none of these things. The woman's name was Carolyn, and she introduces the nut that saved our marriage, the nut with the story. She said one day she was having lunch with her husband and their son, Michael. Mike was visiting them in their Los Angeles home. He lived in San Diego. He was a helicopter pilot. At one point during the lunch, Mike and his father started to talk about guy things, I guess they thought they were. The helicopter that Mike flew, and Mike said, "You know, Dad, as complicated as a helicopter is, its whirling rotor is held in place by one single nut. The whole thing would come crashing down, crashing and burning to the ground on one single hexagonal nut." Now, it's bigger than this one, but this is sort of, it's hexagonal. And it holds it all together. Turning to his mother, Mike said, "And Mom, I know you're so religious, but do you know what they call that nut that holds the whole thing together?" His mother shrugged. She was thinking of something else that she was much more important than what they were talking about. She had no idea what they called it. I give up. She said, what do they call the nut? Mike smiled and said, they call it the Jesus nut. At first she thought, well, that sounds kind of sacrilegious. But with a little help from Mike, she came to understand exactly why they gave it that name. His mother saw the connection between Jesus and the nut that held the rotor together. Just as Jesus, by his death and his resurrection, holds the human race together. Carolyn saw Jesus playing the same role in her marriage. The many pieces of marriage can be overwhelming at times. And yet, it was this Jesus nut that held her marriage together. Like a helicopter, there's so much that can go wrong in a marriage. Many of you here could tell stories. You could weep, you could laugh, you could just wonder the mystery of life. Removing Jesus from her marriage, she thought, well, I guess that would be like removing the Jesus nut from Mike's helicopter. Our marriage would crash and burn. The idea of Jesus being the one who holds everything together is the theme of our readings today. And the first reading talks about Jesus as being the cornerstone of a building. Now, we don't see it quite that way because of the design of this church, but some of the old churches, especially in Europe, were built in such a way that the cornerstone actually did hold the building up. And if you pulled out and destroyed the cornerstone, the whole building would collapse. So the scripture tells us that Jesus is like the cornerstone of our whole life. It holds us together in so many ways. Jesus is the shepherd of the flock, and his role is to hold us together gently, powerfully, lovingly, so that nothing will harm us. And that's the role Jesus plays in Christian marriage. The key, though, is in opening our lives, our hearts, to this Jesus. We can go through the motions. We can. And we think that's faith. But faith is more than religion. Faith is a profound belief that God makes a difference in our life through his Son Jesus in the power of the Spirit. If our marriage or our family is in trouble, maybe it's because we've forgotten about the nut that God destined to hold it together. The nut that is Jesus himself. Maybe we've forgotten how leaving Jesus out, we haven't invited him into our marriage, is asking for trouble. I went through some of the scriptures here, and I thought to myself, for example, newlyweds at Cana invited Jesus to a wedding. He changed water into wine because he cared that they be happy. He knew that this was a critical moment. They were beginning their marriage, and they would have many ups and downs, and he wanted them to have a happy wedding. Now, Mary, his wonderful mother, prompted him, but he was deep down willing to do this because they invited him into their life, into their early marriage. Or when Peter goes and visits, or Jesus goes and visits Peter's house. When he goes there, he sees Peter's mother-in-law actually, is near death. And Jesus heals her because he visits the family. They invite him in. Or the time when the Roman centurion, the last thing a Roman centurion, they had 100 soldiers under them, the centurion. The last thing a Roman would want to do, because it would be embarrassing to be seen as going to a Jewish rabbi, and not even a successful one, according to the way they looked at things. But he goes to the house of the Roman centurion, and he heals his servant. They invited him into their life. They invited Jesus into their life. Or when the sisters, that beautiful story of the gospel, Martha and Mary and Lazarus. Martha and Mary invited Jesus into their home because their brother had died and they were desperate for some kind of a miracle. They were desperate for what Jesus could give them, and he raises Lazarus from the dead to life, changing them forever. Or when Jairus invited Jesus into his home, and he restored the little girl to life. She was dying. It makes us ask ourselves, what wonderful things could we do? What kind of power do you have? What kind of power do I have? Once I've invited Jesus into my life, invited Jesus into the reality of who I am, and the ups, the downs, the good days and the bad, are we willing to grab on to the Jesus nut and realize that Jesus, in the midst of it all, truly makes a difference? Truly.